Can you believe it is 2025 already? I am absolutely blown away that another year has started. And I always love talking at the beginning of the year about food and beverage trends. I work in the tech industry now, but I spent over a decade working in hospitality prior, spent a lot of time at Walt Disney World working in food and beverage. And I am a little bit of a foodie, well, a lot of a foodie. And so I kind of geek out at the beginning of every year, learning about what trends seem to be popping up around the food and beverage industry. So in today's show, we are going to talk about the 5 top trends coming in 2025, what that means for the wine industry, and maybe some things to keep an eye out for. Hi friends, my name is Sarah. I'm a certified sommelier and host of the Wine CEO podcast show. And each week on this channel, I love to break apart wine topics that are unique to the wine industry, talking to winemakers, wine influencers, and others who can help us make wine a little more fun and approachable and less intimidating. This week, we are starting off 2025. I hope you had a fabulous holiday season celebrating with friends, family, and loved ones. And we are getting the year started with some really fun topics. So if you haven't yet subscribed to my show, please do so now. Hit that subscribe button and be sure to follow along on Instagram at The Wine CEO for all the exciting wine content coming your way. All right, so I really enjoyed my holiday season. I enjoyed my break the last 2 weeks over Christmas and New Year's, and now we're back, and I'm so excited to be kicking off the year with one of my favorite wine topics, which is always the Food and Beverage Trend Report. And there's a lot of different industry reports that pull out their trend list for the new year, and so I kind of research all of them and then pull together some common ones, as well as the ones that I think are most interesting and most exciting for the food and beverage industry. So first up, of the 5 we're going to talk about today, let's just get it out of the way. Let's talk about it. Non-alcoholic beverages. So this in general is a pretty big trend. And I talked a few weeks ago about why Gen Z is not drinking. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely head back and watch that. I'll link it here. It's a really interesting episode. And I think it gives some perspective into why we might be seeing a trend of non-alcoholic drinks kind of coming onto the scene right now as well. But this is a big trend. This is something we've been seeing for a while. Mocktails instead of cocktails, more non-alcoholic beer options, and now a lot of non-alcoholic wines. And so I think in general, this trend continues to grow as folks are looking for a healthier overall lifestyle. Now, while some folks are sober or sober curious, and so that's driving this, I think that it does come from a larger trend of just overall health awareness. And we're going to talk a little bit later in a moment about some other kind of health focused trends. But really, I think that this one is folks are more mindful of what they're putting in their body. I think we're learning more about the results of having an unhealthy lifestyle or using some of the chemicals in some of our food production that we haven't been as focused on or as aware of. So as new research is showing the negative health effects of some of these chemicals and forever chemicals and things that have been used in our food production, that's really making people think twice about the way that they're enjoying the food and drinks that they put into their body. So I think as this overall health trend grows, people are thinking about alcohol a lot. They're thinking about drinking in moderation. They're thinking about cutting alcohol out completely. And it's not just about concern for overconsumption. Obviously, alcoholism is very dangerous, but I think a lot of it is also calories. It's kind of considering if it's really necessary or if there's a more suitable alternative. So across the board in general, we're kind of seeing this move toward non-alcoholic alternatives. And there's 2 ways to really think about that when it comes to wine. So there are wine substitutes that are being made, and usually these are just going to be called a non-alcoholic wine or a non-alcoholic beverage. These can be everything from a blend of juices. I've seen non-alcoholic teas and some interesting like kind of bubbly fermented style drinks that don't have any alcohol in them, but they have kind of this like, I'm going to call it wine-esque character to them. And so they don't taste like wine at all, but they are a non-alcoholic substitute. Then you have de-alcoholized wines. And so these are wines that are typically made in the typical winemaking process, but then there's a process where the alcohol is removed, typically through heat. It can sometimes be done in other processes, but basically a de-alcoholized wine is a wine that was made as a wine and then the alcohol was removed. These wines are going to taste a little bit closer to what you might be familiar with a regular wine. And so I think with these two categories, folks are experimenting a lot. There's a lot of wineries that are starting to make either non-alcoholic versions of their typical regular wines, or they're also making lower ABV wines. Meiomi, for example, just came out with I think it's like 8 or 9% Pinot Noir, so really low ABV Pinot Noir compared to their typical Pinot Noir that has, I think, like 14% ABV. So there's a lot of wineries that are doing that too. So they're kind of experimenting right now with lower ABV or non-alcoholic wines. Up to this point, I'll be honest, I have struggled to find a really great non-alcoholic wine option, like a de-alcoholized wine. There's been a couple that have been fine. If you know of any amazing brands that are making some great non-alcoholic wines, I would love to try them. I think now that there's more of a focus on this, I think we're going to see some better ones popping up. But I think that some of the early adopters in this space struggled to make their product taste close enough to wine that folks were excited about it instead of a regular glass of wine. For me, I think everything in moderation is kind of how I live my life. And that's everything, right? Like food, TV, work, everything, right? And so with wine, it's the same thing. I definitely try to practice really healthy habits. And for me, I would rather have one glass of really great wine and be done for the day or the week than have like 2 or 3 glasses of a not so great wine or a non-alcoholic wine that I'm just not excited about. And so I think that for me, I'm still looking for a really great non-alcoholic alternative. And hopefully over the next couple months, as there are more and more hitting the market, I can try some more and then recommend some really great options. But that is one of the trends that we are going to see. We're going to start seeing a lot more demand from consumers and also response from the industry around making non-alcoholic wines. The second big trend in the food and beverage industry is sustainable packaging. And so obviously this isn't just for beverages, this is for food in general. We're seeing a lot of producers starting to look at their packaging, trying to reduce their overall environmental impact, reduce their carbon footprint. And I think this is a fabulous trend. This is actually one that a lot of wineries have been focused on for quite some time now. The weight of glass is really important. If you have a really heavy bottle and then you're shipping hundreds of bottles, this can have incredible carbon footprint compared to maybe looking at a really thinner glass or possibly some other types of packaging. We've seen a lot more movement toward cans and boxes over the last few years with some really great wine brands because they're looking at how they can reduce their overall environmental impact, and glass is really heavy. So I think this is something we're definitely going to start seeing more of in the wine industry, especially. So different packaging types, maybe wineries even looking at ways that they can be more sustainable in the vineyards, in their tasting rooms, what they're using as far as their energy sources, and ways that they can just reduce waste in general. I think this is a trend that is awesome to see. Again, I know a lot of winemakers that have already been focused on this for the last few years, looking at regenerative farming practices, and I'm really excited that it continues to be a big trend in both the beverage industry as well as the food industry. And so I think we'll see a lot more wineries kind of leaning toward this in the future as well. So as I mentioned in the intro, I am a big foodie. I love cooking. That's actually one of the things I want to do more of in 2025, spend some more time in the kitchen. And one of the biggest trends for 2025 is international food flavors. And I love this because as someone who loves to travel and experience new foods, seeing international food flavors become a trend is really exciting. I am that absolute weirdo, I will admit, when I am traveling to a new city, one of the things at the top of my to-do list is to walk into a local grocery store. Weird, I know, because everybody hates grocery shopping, but honestly, I love it because when you go to this new city, you can see what their groceries look like. Do they structure the grocery store the same way we do? Do they have totally unique and different fruits that you've never seen before or packaged goods? I don't know. I know I'm a total weirdo, but anyway, I love going to grocery stores and I love exploring international food aisles in stores here in the US because you can always find something really unique and different. So if you love travel or if you just love trying different foods, this is a really cool trend. I'm definitely seeing it in my hometown of Orlando as well. The plethora of food options is growing and the diversity and the unique regions that the restaurants are representing are really, really cool. So I'm excited about this trend. I'm hoping that what it does is it also puts an additional focus on the wine industry because with unique regions that are kind of becoming trendy as far as food, there's going to be a need for either wines from those regions or beverages that pair well with that regional food to also come to the forefront of the consumer's mind. And so I'm excited about that because there may be some wine regions that are considered a little less known, a little more minor. And as foods from those regions become more popular, I think wines from those regions could as well. So if you love travel, if you love food, and you're into trying some new flavors, I think this is a really fun trend that we'll see over the next year that could be kind of fun to follow. All right, so the fourth trend that we're seeing for 2025 is overall transparency in labeling as well as ingredient quality. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, this comes from folks being a little more focused on what they're putting into their body. And I will admit, this is definitely a trend that I have jumped on over the last few years, especially as I've gotten into my 30s, just paying more attention about what I'm putting into my body and shopping local, fresh ingredients and trying to cut out a lot of processed foods. So I think in general, folks are wanting to know what goes into the production of their food and beverages. And so transparency and labeling is becoming a really key priority because people want to make sure that the quality of the ingredients going into the food that they're consuming is really high and that there aren't additives or preservatives or chemicals going into the things that they're consuming. Now, this is a really interesting one for the wine industry because as a whole, there really aren't a lot of regulations around labeling what goes on wine. And this is not just for the US. This is pretty much around the globe. There's very little legislation in any regions that require winemakers to put a list of ingredients on the bottle or to give you nutritional facts about the wine. So it makes it really hard for the consumer because there's just not as much awareness. And I think that is making some people be a little more picky about the wines that they're willing to buy. This also has opened up the door for some marketing that I'm not really a fan of. I think that there's some wineries out there that are labeling themselves as like healthy wines or low sugar wines or trying to maybe say that they have, really pure ingredients. The reality is that many of these wines are the exact same as other wines that are out there. They're just marketing them in a certain way. And I think it can be kind of misleading for the consumer. For example, I saw a wine recently labeling itself as like a healthier wine that was lower calorie. And it was saying it was only like 110 calories per serving. Well, this is actually very standard for most wines that you'll see on the shelves of your store. They're going to range anywhere from 100 to 130 calories per glass, and that's a 5-ounce pour. So that's one serving. So it's right in line with what the industry standard would be. So it's not necessarily any less calories or any healthier. And so I think that kind of like labeling and marketing can be really misleading to the consumer that doesn't necessarily know what the standard is for a regular bottle of wine. And so it's interesting. I think we'll start to see a lot of winemakers being more transparent about what goes into the winemaking process, what they're using to produce their wine, and maybe even putting some nutritional labels on wines. I've started to see this a little bit with some brands, and I absolutely love it because I think the more we can normalize the transparency into what's going into the wine, the more it'll become an expectation of all winemakers. And I think that's a really positive thing. I think it helps with education for consumers, and it also lets people decide if it's something that they want to buy and put into their body. So I'm really excited about this trend. I think for food, we can all agree it's a really great thing. And we've started to see more focus on this over the last few years, but I'm excited that now we're starting to see it kind of enter into the beverage industry as well. And I think that while it is a little bit of a burden on the winemaker and it's a shift from some of the traditional practices, I think this is a really positive one and one that I'm really excited about. And then last but not least, the fifth trend that we're seeing for food and beverage in 2025 is more ready to drink beverage options. I was actually surprised at how many things on the trend industry lists this year really revolved around beverages. There's a huge focus on beverages, a little bit on food, but a lot around beverages. And I think people are looking for some different and unique things. I think kind of the creativity over the last few years has maybe been lacking. And so folks are looking for some new things. And one of those new things they're looking for is ready to drink single package options. So when we're talking ready to drink, often that usually is referencing like cocktails that are pre-mixed and in a single use package. But I think it can also definitely be referring to the beer industry and also the wine industry. And we have kind of seen this shift over the last few years of a lot of winemakers looking at smaller packaging options so that folks don't have to necessarily open up an entire bottle if they're the only one drinking. Also think about where you might be going to a party like a picnic or the beach and you want to bring a couple of single serve options. Ready to drink wine options are really becoming more and more popular. So what I've seen in the past is a lot of can and box options, but now we're also starting to see very small glass bottles. We're starting to see some winemakers that traditionally have not offered smaller packaging look at what they can do to bring more single serve or like half bottle options to the consumer at very affordable rates as well. These aren't necessarily overly expensive because they're single serve, which I think is awesome because I think one, it helps promote more responsible consumption because sometimes when you have a bottle open, you just drink it without even thinking or you're pouring more because you have it and you don't want it to go to waste. But when it's a single serve option, you know you're having one glass or 1.5 glasses, whatever the serving is, and then it's gone, right? And you got to enjoy it. So I think that's awesome. And again, I think it's great when you have multiple friends that like to drink different things, have different tastes, then you have an option to be able to open up a lot of different bottles and let everyone drink what they love. We are seeing some winemakers that are looking at like different units where they can do this type of bottling at the winery and then send people home with samples from tasting rooms. I think that's awesome. And also we've seen a lot of different like storage devices. So think about like the Coravin and some other things that are helping you dispense wine without having to open up the whole bottle. So I think that's kind of a response to this trend as well. But I definitely think over the next couple of months, we're going to start to see more small serve, like single serve wine bottles and smaller portions hitting the market as like full package, ready to drink wine options as well. So I'm really excited for that one too, because I think it's just convenience, right? It's ease. And it's also something that, again, promotes, I think, healthy consumption too. So those are kind of the 5 main trends, but I have to add a bonus as well. Although it's not something that I found on the industry trend list, I'm seeing more and more of a focus in the wine industry toward natural wines as well as orange wines. This is something that I think we've definitely been experiencing over the last few years. I've talked about it in the last 2 years, trend reports as well, but that's something I continue to see really picking up. I think, again, there's a lot more of a focus around winemakers trying to have as little impact in the winemaking process and really just kind of letting the grapes and the terroir show for itself. So we keep seeing a lot of increase of awareness from consumers as well around what natural wines are, as well as orange wines. And so I'm seeing those more and more on restaurant menus, which I think is really exciting. Now, something that I would love to see be a trend more, and I see it sometimes, but I'm just going to speak it out there because I want it to become a trend. And so maybe you all can help me with this, but supporting local small winemakers is key. If you've been here on the Wine CEO podcast for a while, then you know that I love supporting small winemakers. And this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I love finding winemakers who are doing some outstanding work and they maybe are a part of a family that's been making wine for many generations. And it's their family business and I love supporting them. And I think that oftentimes, not always, I'm going to make a generalist statement, but often I find that those wines are really high quality. They're made really well because there's a lot of care and attention that goes into making those wines that sometimes, not always, but sometimes larger production wines just don't always have the same care and attention, right? You're producing a very large scale wine. And so you may not have the same oversight around grape quality or even the final wine quality. Again, massive generalization, so not always the case, but that's something that I find is really great about smaller wineries, that you often find that there's incredible care and attention that goes into the production process. So I love supporting small winemakers and local family winemakers. So I hope that you will as well and join me in that so that we can make that a trend for 2026. So I hope you found this episode interesting. I have a lot of great content coming your way over the next couple of weeks. I made a trip to Napa a few months ago, and so I'm going to be bringing you some interviews from winemakers I got to meet with there, some really exciting winemakers, and then also We're going to be doing some intros into some wine regions over the next couple of months, some specific topics around particular wines and wine varietals, and so much more. So again, if you haven't subscribed to the Wine CEO podcast channel, make sure you do so now so you don't miss any of this upcoming wine content. If you are participating in Dry January, I wish you the best of luck. I am doing Damp January, I'll call it, where I'm definitely just cutting back because I enjoyed a lot of wine over the holiday season, and so I'm just giving my body a little bit of a break. If you want to listen to my episode about Dry January from, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. It's been a little while. I've linked that below so that you can go ahead and listen to that. Kind of an interesting listen about wine and health overall, and the general kind of things to think about if you're going through a Dry January. And as always, if you have any questions about this episode or wine in general, don't hesitate to send me an email, sarah@thewineceo.com, or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram @thewineceo. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think about these food and beverage trends. If you have a moment to give me a quick review, I would love that. That's how folks find out more about the Wine CEO podcast. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop me a quick review. If you're here on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment below. Let me know if you're enjoying the Wine CEO podcast. Until next week, friends, I hope you drink something new and delicious, unless you're doing Dry January, and then maybe enjoy something else. And I will catch you all in the next episode of the Wine CEO podcast.